we got through three of the basic principles of the Constitution. Okay. Now, as I was explaining to the other class, when you write an essay, you write an introduction and you write a conclusion. So you're going to have 5 body paragraphs with 5 basic principles. Okay. That are in your notes, that are posted, and in the lecture, if you want to have them explained to you, there they are. Okay, so the first basic principle is popular sovereignty, where this goes back to like John Locke, and the authority to rule comes from the people, not God. You have limited government. It's a tradition we get from the English. The third basic principle is separation of powers. This one gets in a lot more detail, so I broke down a little bit of the legislative branch, a little bit of the executive branch, and a little bit of the judicial branch. And that's what we got through and started on the fourth basic principle of the Constitution, which is checks and balances. Okay? My pen's disappearing. Okay, guys, this covering a lot of material in this chapter. Okay, obviously this stuff here with the basics of the Constitution, but we're also going to be looking at the amendment process and the amendments to the Constitution. So with checks and balances, it's not super complicated. For instance, just if you had to say, okay, the executive checks the legislature. So we know the legislature passes laws. How can the executive check the legislature? The president. What can the president do when Congress sends him a bill? Yeah, the V word, veto. Okay. So that's pretty simple. You guys all heard of that before. Okay. So, and I actually have a chart, I think it's on the next slide, that really shows you all the checks and balances, okay? So, really, Congress is forced to consider the opinion of the president before they pass something. So, I mean, if they say, hey, Mr. President, we're planning on doing this, and he's like, I don't support that, I'm going to veto it. Well, maybe they change it before they pass it, okay? So it kind of requires the two branches to talk to each other, communicate with one another, okay? So that's the veto. Did you guys know that you can override a veto? The Congress can override a veto. So if you have the legislative branch, they pass a law, send it to the president. He says veto, okay? Them. If 2/3 of both houses of Congress approve it, they can override that veto. Okay. Now it's hard to get 2/3 of both houses of Congress to agree on anything. That's really difficult. Okay. I gave the example yesterday. I don't know if you heard this. When George W. Bush was president for 8 years, he only vetoed 2 pieces of legislation. One of them was on government funding of embryonic stem cell research. I know you guys have probably heard that before, like in your religion classes or something. You know, you guys know what stem cells are, or familiar with what I'm talking about with embryo. Okay, so like people that have diabetes, sometimes like their pancreas doesn't produce enough insulin. Okay, so the thought is that you could inject healthy stem cells into a pancreas, and maybe it would regenerate itself. Okay. The idea with embryonic stem cells is that they're like blank slates. They haven't fully developed into like a specific cell yet. So they might be able to use those to for all different types of ailments that people might have. Now, where are they getting these embryos? Do this research on them. From aborted babies, okay? Now, abortion is legal in this country. Okay, so it's legal to do this research on aborted babies, but should taxpayers have to pay for it? And that was the question. So Congress passed funding to fund embryonic stem cell research, which would mean your and I tax dollars would be going to fund this. Okay, George Bush vetoed that. Okay, and then 2/3 of Congress, both houses, overrode his veto. Okay, now, since the science has improved on this, they've realized that healthy adult stem cells are just as good, if not better, than embryonic stem cells. And you can also get stem cells from like the umbilical cord from a birth and that sort of thing. So the necessity of doing this type of research on embryos or aborted babies is something that really I don't think the American people should be forced to fund or pay for. You know what I mean? But it was a good job by Bush, but in my opinion anyways, okay? So that's how our system kind of functions like that, okay? You get this back and forth, the checks and balances, okay? So that's just what this says, okay? The president's power is limited over Congress because they can override that with 2/3 vote in both houses, okay? You guys know this, I think, okay? Only Congress can pass spending bills, okay? In fact, if they're going to spend your money, it has to start in the House of Representatives, right? Senate can't start funding bills. It has to start in the lower house. That's something that we go back to from the colonial era, from the British House of Commons, okay? And then this one is one that is current, what we're talking about right now, with Amy Coney Barrett, who's up for the Supreme Court, okay? Yesterday, did I show you guys any of the committee hearing on her? Did any of you guys see any of that where they were questioning Amy Coney Barrett? Okay. Basically, in a committee room in the Senate Judiciary Committee, okay, so you got Amy Coney Barrett sitting here, and you have the senators sitting here, and this is just a committee, okay? So the senators are asking her questions. She's sitting at a table, and she went through 4 days of this, okay? Well, yesterday, the committee voted whether to move her along to the full Senate, okay? And this is what the room looked like. I don't know if you guys heard about this. There's 22 people on the committee. 12 of them are Republicans, 10 are Democrats. The party in charge always has more people on the committees, the one that controls the majority of the seats. And all the Democrats didn't show up for the vote. Okay, so she was moved forward with a 12-0 vote. This is the job of the Senate, okay, is to advise and consent the president. Advise the president and consent to his appointments, okay? 10 Democrats didn't show up to do that. Now, Monday, Amy Coney Barrett will go in front of the full Senate. There'll be some other hearings that other senators can ask her questions. At this point, it's just been the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. And that will take a couple of days, and then they'll call for a vote. Now, in the Senate right now, there's 53 Republicans, 47 Democrats. Okay? This is the impact of elections, guys. Okay, so if she's put up, now there's one Republican said that she's not going to vote for Amy Coney. She's Senator Collins from Maine has said she's not. okay? But all you need is 51 votes, okay? So even if you had 3 Republicans vote against her, who can break that tie vote? The VP, Mike Pence, okay? The vice president is the president of the Senate, okay? He doesn't really do anything there, but if there's a tie, he breaks the tie, okay? So she's going to become a chief justice or a justice on the Supreme Court, okay? Now, I don't know if the Democrats are going to boycott the full vote on the floor, okay? They get paid $174,000 a year, and their job is to advise and consent or not. So showing up to vote would be part of their job, okay? So, I mean, right now she's moving along unanimously, 12-0. Okay, the vote would have been 12-10, but if they were doing their job. So, international treaties, okay, this is important too. This is the role of the Senate, okay. 2/3 of the Senate have to approve treaties. Now, guys, this, like I said, you got to get 67 votes out of 100. Which is really difficult to do, especially when you've got a situation like this where the Senate is 53-47, okay? You've got to have a lot of agreement. So they wanted to make sure that both sides really supported the treaty, both parties, before they did something like this. George Washington really warned us about treaties. He said that you get into entangling alliances. Okay, it's going to cause you problems. I don't know if you remember this. I know you were at home during the lockdown at the end of the year when in history you're supposed to study World War I in your history class. But you might remember the teacher talking about the League of Nations. The League of Nations was created after World War I. It was actually President Wilson's idea. He had his 14 points. They took that and started to build the League of Nations. And the United States did not join, even though it was our president's idea. The vote was 82-13, no. We're not joining the League of Nations because just like the stuff we're talking about, we've talked about to this point, guys, popular sovereignty, representative government, we get to choose our leaders. If we join an international organization like the United Nations, does this organization think they have any sovereignty over you and I? We don't get to elect those people. Okay, so they should have no say over us. And that's what the Senate said in 1919. Okay. Now, after World War II, we did join the United Nations. Okay, and we can talk about that all day. I can talk about that in history class, but yeah. Okay. So checks and balances. This is a great slide, guys. Found this a few years back. There's going to be no. There will not be an essay or a long answer question for you guys on this because this will be part of your essay. Okay. So let's just look at this. You guys have seen this before when I wrote it up on the board. Legislative branch is called Congress. You got the House, the Senate. Okay. They can veto each other's bills. Okay. But you don't need to really talk about that. You got the executive branch, the president, the vice president, the cabinet departments, other agencies. And then you got the judicial branch, which I talked about yesterday, Supreme Court, courts of appeals. There's 13 circuit courts and then 94 district courts. All right, so what can happen? Congress approves presidential nominations. We just talked about that. The Senate, okay, controls the purse. It can pass laws over the president's veto and can impeach the president. Okay. Now, if you paid attention to the impeachment of Donald J. Trump, okay, he is the third president to be impeached. None of the presidents have been impeached have been removed from office. So impeachment just means to formally accuse somebody of doing something wrong. Then it goes to, that's done by the House, and then the Senate has to convict. And guess what? you need 2/3 to convict. Okay, and when the Senate looked like this, 53-41, were they going to convict President Trump? No, everybody knew that. Okay, now when Richard Nixon got in trouble with Watergate, there was a real feeling that he was not only going to be impeached, but he was going to be removed. Okay, and so he just went ahead and resigned before they even impeached him. Okay, so he was never impeached. Bill Clinton was impeached, and Andrew Johnson was impeached. Andrew Johnson was Lincoln's vice president. Okay, but he was not removed from office either. All of these were kind of, political witch hunts. I don't know if you know about the Bill Clinton situation. It was about lying over sex. He did lie under oath in front of a federal judge, which is a felony. But he was covering his tracks on extramarital affairs. And so he got impeached, but not removed. Okay, what else we got here? Congress can pass a law, and you guys know this, right? The whatever that is, just turn it off. I don't know. The court can declare the law unconstitutional. You guys know that. And then the Senate has to confirm. The president gets to pick these people, right? And the Senate has to approve them. We just talked about that. Congress can impeach judges. Okay, this is pretty rare. It has happened where you have judges, federal judges, that do something wrong, break the law, get accused of a crime. You can't impeach judges for stupid decisions. If they make a bad decision, you can't impeach them for that. They have to commit a crime. Okay, just like the president. Okay. All right, and then you come over here. The court can declare presidential actions unconstitutional. Okay, and the president gets to nominate judges. Okay. This is pretty much it. You think checks and balances are going to be a whole lot more? There's other stuff, but this is kind of the meat and potatoes of it. Okay, and not really that difficult to understand. Okay, so that's helpful. So on your essay, you wouldn't have to necessarily mention all of these, okay? But you would want to talk about, the veto and overriding the veto, and how the president gets to appoint the judges, and how the Supreme Court has what's called judicial review, okay? Which is on the next slide. Okay. Now, when they wrote the Constitution, guys, at the time, in 1789, when it was ratified, you had three branches. And Alexander Hamilton wrote in Federalist, I think it was 78, that the judicial branch is by far the weakest of the three branches. Okay. So they built the White House for the president. They built the U.S. Capitol for the House and the Senate. The Supreme Court was meeting in the unfinished basement of the U.S. Capitol. They didn't even have their own building. All right. The first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court was John Jay. Remember him from the Federalist Papers? Okay. John Jay, after serving as the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court for about a year, said, this is stupid. Why am I sitting in this basement in the Capitol? We have no authority. I quit. Okay, he just quit. Okay, and then you got this next guy named John Marshall. He became the second Chief Justice. Okay, and there's going to be a very important case that is going to create this power known as judicial review. Okay, Very important case. Takes place in 1803. Anybody remember it? It's not Marshall versus Maryland, but that's a good guess. You got the initials right. Hercules. M&M. Okay. Checks the legislature and executive, judicial review. Okay. Power of the courts to decide if laws or actions are valid under the Constitution. Okay. That court case is called. Oh, it's not yet. There it is. Marbury versus Madison. Does that ring a bell? No? Marbury versus Madison. Okay, so if a law is found to be invalid, it's unconstitutional. Okay, so next year or soon, this was brought up in the debate last night. Amy Coney Barrett, what the Democrats are worried about is there is a case that's going to be in front of the Supreme Court questioning the constitutionality of Obamacare. Okay, and so really that's what all the Democrats have been questioning her about. They could find it unconstitutional. All right, I don't think they will. Now there are parts of it that are unconstitutional. Okay, but they've already gotten rid of that. You hear Trump talk about the individual mandate. Did any of you guys watch the debate last night? Well, let's talk about the debate. What'd you think? Some made you laugh?
Yeah.
Did you think the moderator was fair?
No, but she was definitely better.
She was better than the first guy, right? Yeah. And then, you know what, I'll flip over to Fox, and the first person they go to ask about the debate was the first moderator. I'm like, why are you interviewing that dude? I don't need to listen to him.
I did like when she was like, well, Biden, he goes, shorten people shouldn't go to jail for drug abuse. And she goes, well, you did vote on a bill that said they had a longer jail sentence for drug abuse. And I was like, oh, she got him. Yeah.
They said she interrupted Trump 25 times.
Which is less than 7.
And only interrupted Biden twice. Okay. I didn't really catch that. I mean, I noticed he was trying to get some words out. He was trying to counter. I didn't take note of, because he kind of fought through those interruptions, but she stopped. She interrupted him, but then she stopped and let him finish, which I thought was good. He had a point to make. I think when either one of them had a point to make, she pretty much let him make it. So I didn't like all the questions. Okay. I thought they could have, asked some different questions, but
a lot of them were just repeats.
Yeah. Well, and I think the questions were probably formed to, make it harder for Trump, but that's okay. There were no real, I don't know if there was any real good one-liners or zingers in there.
Mr. Lincoln over here. That really.
Which one?
But it was like, and Mr. Lincoln over here.
Oh, yeah.
That caught me. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. I laughed out loud.
Yeah.
I thought that was funny.
Yeah, Trump's personality like that when he says, I've done more for, for blacks than since Lincoln. Now, economically, we saw unemployment at historic lows. For African Americans, and we saw rising wages, especially against the lower income groups. They were seeing faster wage increases than the upper level people, which is all positive for everybody. I think. I think when the lower income people start seeing higher wages, that's great for everybody. So, I mean, it sucks that the pandemic happened because things were rolling along pretty good. And when your economy starts to boom, it causes a lot of other problems to go away, you know, like social problems, you know, economic problems, budget problems. I've always been kind of an economy voter. That's a big thing for me is like, I want economic growth, you know. The stuff on energy is interesting. About, you know, the fracking and then, you know, Joe Biden said, I've never, you know,
Never said that. Show me the tape.
yeah. So Trump put the tweet up of Joe saying it.
That I'm like,
Multiple
why
times.
did you say that? You just dug
Yeah.
yourself a hole.
So there were a couple lies that Biden got, you know what I mean? And then the stuff with the laptop and his son, this isn't going away. The business partner of Hunter Biden gave a press conference yesterday, and he's turning over documents to the FBI. Joe did know what his son was doing. I mean, dude, he flew on Air Force Two to China with his dad, okay, met with these Chinese bankers, and 10 days later, his group gets a $1.5 billion deal with this Chinese group, which is now bankrupt. But you can't tell me that Joe didn't know what was going on. You know what I mean? And his brother did very well as well. It wasn't just his son, it was both brothers have benefited from Joe while he was vice president. So when he says, I never talked to my son about his business stuff overseas. Well, he was traveling with his dad, so they never talked about it. Okay, and so this business partner says, no, I was in the room when they were talking about it. Okay, so is it illegal? No. Okay, is it unethical? Yes. Okay, so I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. We got 11 days. You know, I think if you were a Biden supporter, you thought Biden probably won the debate. If you're a Trump supporter, you probably think Trump won the debate. I mean, definitely Trump was a lot calmer. He came off much more presidential. There's this guy named Frank Luntz. Oops. He's like he's a pollster, and I watched some of his stuff last night. So he had a group of about 12 undecided voters, and they did it over like Zoom, and usually he has them all sitting in a room. And these undecided voters, they asked them questions and how they felt about the debate and so forth. And I think when it came to the, you know, Hunter Biden and these business dealings with Joe, a lot of them really wanted to find out what the truth was. And as you guys know, the media, except for, you know, right-wing media, is the only ones covering this. Okay, but people are hearing about it. Okay, the cover, you know, that Twitter and Facebook have tried to shut this down, and then PBS has said they're not going to report on it. Well, people hear that and they're like, why are these people, you know? We went through 3.5 years of Russian collusion with Donald Trump, and it was wall-to-wall coverage for 3 years. And guess what? There was no collusion. $48 million was spent in that investigation. Okay? And now you get this laptop that has been verified that it belonged to Hunter Biden. Okay? And they won't cover it. So it's blatant. And people know it. Okay? So Trump accepts it. He's like, you know, I know, you know, they don't like me. Fine. And that is one of the things that is the most endearing about President Trump to a lot of people is that he takes on the media. Okay. George W. Bush, I mean, the media hammered him. And George W. Bush would never fight back. okay? And for people that are on the right and despise, you know, the media and just how biased they are, just love the fact that Trump throws it back in their face. Yes, is he unpresidential a lot of the time? Absolutely, okay? And a lot of people don't like him for that. He is not a politician, that's for sure. And that was a good point he brought up with Joe, you know what I mean?
I ran because of you.
Yeah. Yeah, so there was some good stuff, and I thought Biden held his own. You know, he deflected the question about his son's stuff well by, you know, going after Trump on the taxes. And so, I mean, I thought Biden debated well last night. And I thought Trump did too. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see. 50 million people have already voted. Okay, so we'll see. See, it's going to be interesting. And I think Marshall and Bollier debated last night as well. I heard a little bit about that on the way to work this morning, because I listen to AM radio where you can get news in the morning, find out what's going on. 13:30, pretty good. Okay. And Bollier said she didn't support Biden's increase in taxes, and she said she didn't support packing the court. Okay, so that was interesting. Yeah, okay. All right, let's get back to this a little bit. All right, so if a law is invalid, violates Constitution, unconstitutional, this law or act can no longer be enforced by the government. Okay, now, in order for a law to be found unconstitutional, it has to be challenged. Okay, so Congress passes a law, the Supreme Court just can't say, let me see that law. That's unconstitutional. They can't do that. Somebody's got to sue. There has to be a victim. Okay, guys, for decades, we had segregation in this country, right? Jim Crow laws, like where schools were segregated on the basis of race, right? In 1896, there was a court case. Wow. Versus Ferguson, yeah. Okay. In 1954, okay, and this said separate is equal. So you could segregate swimming pools, you could segregate schools, hotel rooms, restaurants, buses, you could segregate train cars, all this stuff, okay, water drinking fountains, restrooms. So we had basically 60 years of segregation that was legal, okay? In 1954, we get Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education, okay? Now, they say, now who was Brown? Brown is a dad of 3 black girls. And they live in Topeka, Kansas, okay? A lot of our communities in this country were divided by the railroad tracks. On one side of the railroad tracks is where the wealthy people live. On the other side of the railroad tracks is where poor people live, okay? And because minorities were disproportionately poor, they lived on the other side of the tracks. Now, because schools are funded mostly by property taxes, wealthy suburbs can charge higher property taxes for people to live in their homes, and they use that tax money to build nice schools for their kids. Well, on the other side of the tracks, where there's a lot of poverty, you can't charge high property taxes on people. okay? So they don't have enough money for their school. Is separate equal? No, it's not. Okay, and that's what Brown said. He stood up for his daughters. Now, you think he was scared for his life to go through this whole thing? Hell yeah, he was. Okay, but he was the victim. Him and his daughters were the victim. A law has to be challenged. Somebody has to be a victim of that law. The Supreme Court just can't say that's unconstitutional. Somebody's got to bring that case to them. Okay? And then, even if somebody brings it to them, you got to have 4 of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court have to agree to hear the case. Okay? So, a lot of times, the Supreme Court will not take cases that they don't feel the American people are ready for them to hear. Okay? So, this is a really interesting how our Supreme Court has this judicial review, because it wasn't there in the beginning. It was mentioned in the Federalist Papers. And again, I go back, these are so important because they explain the Constitution. The Federalist Papers do, okay? And so they found this power of review in the Federalist Papers wasn't explicitly stated in the Constitution, okay? So, well, I just said that, okay? So Article 2, Section 3 implies this power, and then you look at the Federalist Papers, okay? Firmly established in 1803 with Marbury v. Madison. So judicial review is something you want to mention in your essay, okay? Now, one other thing I want to talk about, presidential actions can be found unconstitutional as well. And I'd like to share this story with you, okay? How many guys have heard of, I know you have, you've heard of the Trail of Tears, right? Trail of Tears? Okay. Now, this was the Cherokee Indians, and they were living in Georgia, what is present-day Georgia, okay? And President Andrew Jackson wanted them out, okay? He wanted to move them west towards Oklahoma, all right? And so he sent the army down there to drive the Cherokee out. The Supreme Court told President Jackson, you can't do that. Did the Trail of Tears happen? You know what Andrew Jackson said to the Supreme Court? He said, well, then come down here and stop me. The Supreme Court doesn't have a sword. The executive has the sword. So what could have happened to Jackson? That didn't happen. The Supreme Court said his actions violated the Constitution. What could have been done to Jackson? He could have been impeached, right, by the House, and then convicted by the Senate. But Congress agreed with Jackson. Does that make sense? 99% of the time, when the Supreme Court rules a law unconstitutional or an action by the president unconstitutional, it is followed. That decision by the Supreme Court is followed, but not always. Okay? Supreme Court doesn't have its own sword. They don't have like a military unit or cops that go out and force their decision. Okay? When they declare a law unconstitutional, the president that carries out the law says we will no longer carry out these laws. Does that make sense? So it really does. I mean, the way this is pieced together by the founders when we talk about checks and balances, it really does work well. Okay? It's quite amazing how well it's worked, to be honest. Okay? Okay. The 5th basic principle of the Constitution is federalism. Now, we've talked about federalism before. Sharing or division of power between national, state, and local governments. Yes? Federalism protects the rights of the states, establishing a federal system, power shared and divided between national, state, and local government. Yep. Now, Article 6 of the Constitution. Remember the first three articles of three branches? Okay. Article 6, this Constitution and the laws of the United States shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Okay? That's why we have lawyers, so we can understand this crap, right? All right. Basically saying that the U.S. Constitution is superior to state constitutions. United States law is superior to state law. Okay? The supreme law of the land is the United States Constitution. The states are not allowed to do or powers only given to the national government. That are not national government are reserved to whom? What's going on here? Might have lost my connection there for a second. Okay. So powers that national government, the states and local government. That's how our system works. And there, ladies and gentlemen, are the 5 basic principles of the U.S. Constitution. So you got to pare that down into an essay when we get to it. Okay. Now, some of the other things we're going to talk about in here in the coming days are going to be like, how do we amend the Constitution? Okay. And then we're going to do an exercise on learning the amendments, all 27 amendments. Okay. This is going to be fun. And then on the test, you'll have an amendment match, where you have to match the number, the amendment number, with the definition, or what it does, what the amendment says. Okay. Now you already know some of the amendments, right? You know the First Amendment? I hope. If not, we will. Okay? And I'm going to talk about it. We're going to learn all about it. Bill of Rights, all the amendments. Okay? And you're going to be smarter people than you were when you came in. All right? That's it for the week. Have a great one.